Hello students, welcome to third session of Business Law lecture series. In the previous class, we learned regarding sources of Indian mercantile law. And in this particular class, we are going to learn two concepts, that is Indian Contract Act 1872 and meaning of contract. The objective of this session is make you to understand promise, agreement, contract and legal enforceability, one thing, and the second thing, the nature and elements of Contract Act. Students, it's an interesting concept. I hope everyone will love it because you are going to apply these concepts in your day-to-day life. So let us start with the term contract. The term derived from Latin word contractum, which means drawing together. So here drawing together means drawing the principles or the rules of agreement together, which is known by all the parties to the contract. And the second one, according to section 2H of Indian Contract Act, a contract is an agreement enforceable by law. So here you can identify three major words. The first one, contract, which is an agreement and which should be enforceable by law. So here enforceable by law means if any one of the party failed to fulfill the contract, another party can take legal action. ನಮ್ಮ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳುವಾಗ ಯಾವೆಲ್ಲ ಪಾರ್ಟೀಸ್ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ ಆ ಎಲ್ಲ ಪಾರ್ಟೀಸ್ಗಳು ಕೂಡ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಇರುವಂತ ರೂಲ್ಸ್ ಗಳನ್ನ ಫಾಲೋ ಮಾಡ್ಬೇಕಾಗ್ತದೆ. ಸೊ ಈ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ ರೂಲ್ಸ್ ಅನ್ನು ಫಾಲೋ ಮಾಡ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಸಾಧ್ಯ ಆಗದೇ ಇದ್ರೆ ಯಾವ್ದಾದ್ರು ಪಾರ್ಟೀಸ್ ಗಳಿಗೆ ಅವರ ಎಗೇನ್ಸ್ಟ್ ನಾವು ಕೋರ್ಟ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಕೇಸನ್ನ ಫೈಲ್ ಮಾಡಬಹುದು. ಸೊ ಅಂತ ಒಂದು ಏನು ರೈಟ್ಸ್ ಇರ್ತದೆ, ಬೆನಿಫಿಟ್ಸ್ ಇರ್ತದೆ, ದಟ್ ಬೆನಿಫಿಟ್ ಈಸ್ ಕನ್ಸಿಡರ್ಡ್ ಆಸ್ legally enforceable or enforceable by law. So let us consider an example. Mr. Puneet wanted to make a contract with Mr. Naveen, and we can see what are all the elements that they should take into consideration. So that is considered as elements of contract. So these 5 steps are considered as elements or the basic elements of a contract. So the first one, proposal, acceptance, agreement, legal enforceability and contract. So let us consider one by one in a bit detailed format. So the first one, proposal. Is it the proposal that we are talking? Definitely no. So that will be considered in a separate act called Marriage Act. But here we are going to consider the proposal or offer. For example, here Mr. Puneet announces that a house is ready for sale. It is an offer that he is making an offer to sell his property. And Mr. Naveen accepted this offer that he is ready to purchase Mr. Puneet's house. So here we have come across two major concepts, that is offer or the proposal by Mr. Puneet and acceptance to purchase the house by Mr. Naveen. So once these two stages are over, so this can be called as an agreement. So here it is an under contract. So here contract is not yet over, it's under the contract, that means agreement. So once this agreement become registered, so it is legally enforceable. So once it become legally enforceable, then it can be called as a contract. So here you should remember an offer to sell a property and acceptance by another party. Once the acceptance is over, it can be called as an agreement, and if it is registered, then it can be legally enforceable. Once the agreement is legally enforceable, it can be called as a contract. So you should remember these basic steps of a contract. And the second concept that we are going to learn is agreement. So according to section 2 subsection E of an Indian Contract Act, every promise and every set of promise. So here every promise and all the number of promises offering the consideration for each other. So here consider means some reward or some returns to all the parties to a contract. So promise involving consideration to each parties of the contract can be called as a contract. ಏನು ಪ್ರಾಮಿಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೇವೆ ಆ ಪ್ರಾಮಿಸ್ ಮಾಡುವಾಗ ನಮ್ಮ ಎಲ್ಲ ಪಾರ್ಟೀಸ್ ಯಾರೆಲ್ಲ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ ಆ ಪ್ರಾಮಿಸ್ ಪ್ರೋಸೆಸ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಅವರ ಈ ಎರಡೂ ಪಾರ್ಟೀಸ್ ಗಳಿಗೆ ಸಮ್ ರಿಟರ್ನ್ಸ್ ಸಿಗಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಪ್ರಾಮಿಸ್ ಗಳನ್ನ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿ ಕರೀತೇವೆ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತೇವೆ. And the second one, accepted proposal become an agreement. That we have seen in previous case, proposal plus acceptance will become an agreement. So there are some statements regarding agreements and contracts that here again related to elements of contract. An agreement is a promise. Of course, an agreement is a promise. A promise is an accepted proposal. Promise means again acceptance plus proposal. Agreement and promise are synonyms, and promise means proposal plus acceptance. Agreement plus enforceability will become contract. Here agreement plus legal enforceability that become contract. You can see here agreement plus legal enforceability is contract. And there's a famous statement, all agreements are not contracts, but all contracts are agreements. Little bit confusing, but I can see this by the example. We have seen in the last slide, agreement plus legal enforceability will become contract. So let us consider an example. Agreement for sale of goods is both agreement as well as a contract, because sale of goods is an agreement, sale of goods between A and B. So there is a proposal, there is an acceptance, so it's an agreement, and again which can be enforceable by law, so it is a contract. But consider an example, agreement to make some robbery or some crime. Of course, agreement between A and B to make some robbery is an agreement, because offer is there, acceptance is there, so it can be called as agreement, but it cannot be legally enforceable. Is it possible to enforceable? No. So it is not enforceable, legally enforceable. So for that reason, it cannot be called as a contract. It's an agreement, but it's not a contract. Here, it is both agreement and contract. So which proves that all agreements are not contract. It's an agreement, but it's not a contract. But here, it is both agreement and contract. So let us see one more example. So assume that Mr. Ashok invites me for a lunch. With the imagination of a great lunch, I accepted the proposal. Here, inviting me for a lunch is an offer, and acceptance by me is an acceptance. So it can be called as an agreement, right? Agreement means a promise. Promise means acceptance plus proposal or offer. So it can be called as an agreement. But due to some reasons, I failed to join them for lunch. I couldn't able to join them. I have not attended the lunch. In this particular case, I broke the promise, because I have given him acceptance, assurance that I'll come to his home for lunch. But I break an agreement. I break the promise that I have not attended the lunch. In this case, can he file a case against me? No, absolutely no, because it's just an agreement and not a contract. I have break the promise, but even then he cannot enforce this in the eyes of law. He cannot make a complaint against me. So for that reason, it's just an agreement and not a contract. So all agreements are not contracts, but all contracts are agreements. So here, all these process of contracts agreement is a part of contract, but all agreements are not contract. Agreement for sale of goods is an example for this. It's an agreement at the same time it's legally enforceable, so we can call it a contract. But agreement to make robbery, here's a proposal, here's acceptance. It can be an agreement, but which cannot be enforceable by law, so it cannot be called as a contract. Again, let us consider one example. For example, ನಿಮ್ಮ ಈ ಜೋಳದ ಬೀಜಗಳೇನಿದೆ ಇದನ್ನು ನಾವು ಅಗ್ರಿಮೆಂಟ್ಸ್ ಅಂತ ಅಂದ್ಕೊಡುವ, ಅಂಡ್ ಈ ಜೋಳದ ಗಿಡಗಳೇನಿದೆ ಇದನ್ನು ನಾವು ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ಸ್ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿ ಅಂದ್ಕೊಡುವ. ಎಲ್ಲ ಬೀಜಗಳನ್ನ ನಾವು ಗಿಡಗಳಾಗಿ ಕನ್ವರ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಹೆಚ್ಚಿನ ಪಾಲನ್ನ ನಾವು ಒನ್ ಆರ್ ದಿ ಅದರ್ ವೇ ಅದನ್ನ ತಿಂದು ಖಾಲಿ ಮಾಡಿ ಬಿಡ್ತೇವೆ. ಜೋಳದ ಫಾರ್ಮ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿಯೇ ತಿಂದು ಖಾಲಿ ಮಾಡಿ ಬಿಡ್ತೇವೆ. ಈ ಜೋಳ ಬೀಜಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಕೆಲವೊಂದನ್ನ ಮಾತ್ರ ನಾವು ಗಿಡಗಳಾಗಿ ಕನ್ವರ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೇವೆ. ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ಎಲ್ಲ ಬೀಜಗಳು ಗಿಡಗಳಾಗ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಸಾಧ್ಯ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಆದ್ರೆ ಈ ಗಿಡಗಳೇನಿದೆ, ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ ಏನಿದೆ, ಇದು ಆಗ್ಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ಈ ಬೀಜಗಳು ಕಂಪಲ್ಸರಿ ನಮ್ಗೆ ಬೇಕೇ ಬೇಕು. ಅದು ಇಲ್ಲದೆ ಜೋಳದ ಗಿಡಗಳು ಆಗ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಸಾಧ್ಯವೇ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ಆಲ್ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ಸ್ are at the beginning stage are agreements, but all agreements are not contract. ಎಲ್ಲ ಅಗ್ರಿಮೆಂಟ್ಸ್ ಗಳು ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ ಗಳು ಆಗ್ಲೇಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿಲ್ಲ. ಆ ಅಗ್ರಿಮೆಂಟ್ಸ್ ಗಳ ಸ್ಟೇಜ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಅದು ಸ್ಪಾಯ್ಲ್ ಆಗ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಚಾನ್ಸಸ್ ಇರ್ತದೆ. ಸೊ ದಿಸ್ ಹೌ ಯು ಕ್ಯಾನ್ ರಿಮೆಂಬರ್, ಜಸ್ಟ್ ಯು ಕ್ಯಾನ್ ರಿಲೇಟ್ ದ ಕಾನ್ಸೆಪ್ಟ್ಸ್ ಟು ಎನಿ ಎಕ್ಸಾಂಪಲ್. So here the next concept is differences between the agreements and contracts. So there are slight differences that we have already encountered, but let us put it in a table form. The first one, an agreement between two or more parties that is not enforceable by law. You should remember, it is not enforceable by law. It's just a promise consisting of offer plus acceptance, but we cannot enforceable it by law. But contract, it is, or it should be, or necessarily be enforceable by law. The law in the enforceable ಮಾಡ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಸಾಧ್ಯ ಆಗ್ತದೆ ಅಂತ ಆದ್ರೆ ಅಂತಹ ಅಗ್ರಿಮೆಂಟ್ಸ್ ಗಳನ್ನ ನಾವು ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿ ಕರೀತೇವೆ. Does it need to be in writing? Agreements, no need or not necessarily. So just oral formally ಏನು ಪ್ರಾಮಿಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೇವೆ ಅದನ್ನು ಕೂಡ ಅಗ್ರಿಮೆಂಟ್ಸ್ ಆಗಿ ತಗೊಳ್ತೇವೆ. ಬಟ್ ಇನ್ ಕೇಸ್ ಆಫ್ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್, ಆಫ್ ಕೋರ್ಸ್ ಅಗೈನ್ ನೋ. ನಮ್ಮ ಎಲ್ಲ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ಸ್ ಗಳು ರಿಟರ್ನ್ ಫಾರ್ಮ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿಯೇ ಇರಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿ ಯಾವುದೇ ನೆಸೆಸಿಟಿ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಬಟ್ ಎಕ್ಸೆಪ್ಷನ್ಸ್ ವಿ ಹ್ಯಾವ್, ಎಕ್ಸೆಪ್ಟ್ ಫಾರ್ ಸಮ್ ಸ್ಪೆಸಿಫಿಕ್ ಕೈಂಡ್ ಆಫ್ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ such as those involving land or which cannot be completed within 1 year. For example, partnership that may be oral or that may be in written. But if we consider the Companies Act, it should be in a written form. However, a memorandum of association, it should be in written form. Articles of association, it should be in written form. So there is an option either in an oral form or in a written form. But in case of agreements, not necessarily in the form of writing. Considerations required, of course, no, need not necessary. ನಿಮ್ಮ ಪ್ರಾಮಿಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳುವಾಗ ಆ ಪ್ರಾಮಿಸ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಕನ್ಸಿಡರೇಷನ್ಸ್ ಇರಲೇಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿ ಇಲ್ಲ. ರಿಟರ್ನ್ಸ್ ಆರ್ ರಿವಾರ್ಡ್ಸ್ ಅಂತ ಏನ್ ಕರೀತೇವೆ ಇರಲೇಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಬಟ್ ಇನ್ ಕೇಸ್ ಆಫ್ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ ದೇರ್ ಶುಡ್ ಬಿ ರಿಟರ್ನ್ ಫಾರ್ ಆಲ್ ದ ಪಾರ್ಟೀಸ್ ಆಫ್ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್. ಯಾರೆಲ್ಲ ಪಾರ್ಟೀಸ್ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ ಆ ಎಲ್ಲ ಪಾರ್ಟೀಸ್ ಗಳಿಗೆ ಸರ್ಟನ್ ರಿಟರ್ನ್ಸ್ ಇರಲೇಬೇಕು. ಲೀಗಲ್ ಎಫೆಕ್ಟ್ಸ್, an agreement that lacks any of the required elements of a contract has no legal effects. Agreements ಅಲ್ಲಿ legal effects ಇರೋದಿಲ್ಲ, but in case of contract there should be legal effects. There's a basic differences between agreement and contract. So we have studied the meaning of contract and we have a separate law for this contract. And this law is the oldest branch of contract applicable to many contracts we enter into in normal day-to-day life. That's what I said in the beginning itself. ನಮ್ಮ ನಾರ್ಮಲ್ ಡೇ ಟು ಡೇ ಲೈಫಲ್ಲಿ ನಂಬರ್ ಆಫ್ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ಸ್ಗಳಿಗೆ ನಾವು ಫಾರ್ಮ್ ಆಗ್ತೇವೆ. ಫಾರ್ ಎಕ್ಸಾಂಪಲ್, ನಿಮ್ಮ ಟೈಲರ್ಗೆ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಕ್ಲಾತ್ಸ್ನ ಸ್ಟಿಚಿಂಗ್ ಕೊಡ್ತೀರಾ, ದಟ್ಸ್ ಎ ಕೈಂಡ್ ಆಫ್ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್. ಆರ್ ನಿಮ್ಮ ವಾಚ್ನ ರಿಪೇರಿ ಕೊಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀರಾ, ದಟ್ಸ್ ಎ ಕೈಂಡ್ ಆಫ್ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್. ಸೊ ಅಪ್ಲಿಕಬಲ್ ಟು ಮೆನಿ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ಸ್, ನಿಮ್ಮ ಬೇರೆ ಬೇರೆ ರೀತಿಯಾದಂತಹ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ಸ್ಗಳನ್ನ ನಾವು ನೋಡ್ತಾ ಹೋಗ್ತೇವೆ. ದ ಆಬ್ಜೆಕ್ಟಿವ್ ಆಫ್ ದಿಸ್ ಲಾ ಇಸ್ ಟು ಲೇ ಡೌನ್ ದ ಲೀಗಲ್ ರೂಲ್ಸ್ ಆನ್ ದ ಪ್ರಾಮಿಸ್. ಸೊ ನಾವು ಜಸ್ಟ್ ಪ್ರಾಮಿಸ್ ಅಂತ ಏನ್ ಕರಿತೇವೆ, ಅಗ್ರಿಮೆಂಟ್ಸ್ ಅಂತ ಏನ್ ಕರಿತೇವೆ, ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಲೀಗಲ್ ಎನ್ಫೋರ್ಸಬಿಲಿಟಿಯನ್ನು ನಾವು ಫಾರ್ಮ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳುವಂಥದ್ದು ಈ ಪರ್ಟಿಕ್ಯುಲರ್ ಲಾ ಆಫ್ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ ನ ಆಬ್ಜೆಕ್ಟಿವ್ ಆಗಿರ್ತದೆ. ಇಂಡಿಯನ್ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ ಆಕ್ಟ್ 1872, so which came into force on September 1st, which lays down certain general rules relating to contract. General rules that specifies the elements or the basic necessities for a contract. And again, this contract is substantive law and it's not an exhaustive law. So that we can see. Substantive law, that means provides only the limiting principles on the rights and obligations of the contracting parties which they should not violate. So you should remember, substantive law that defines the basic or the so important rules. So it will not specify each and every concept. It will specify this basic or the so important thing that the contracting parties should not violate. ಬೇಸಿಕ್ ಪ್ರಿನ್ಸಿಪಲ್ಸ್ ಗಳನ್ನ ಡಿಫೈನ್ ಮಾಡ್ತದೆ, ಆದ್ರೆ ಅದನ್ನ ವಯಲೇಟ್ ಮಾಡೋ ಹಾಗಿಲ್ಲ. ಅಂತ ಪ್ರಿನ್ಸಿಪಲ್ಸ್ ಗಳನ್ನ ಮಾತ್ರ ಡಿಫೈನ್ ಮಾಡ್ತದೆ. ಅದನ್ನು ಫುಲ್ಫಿಲ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಅದಕ್ಕಿಂತ ಹೆಚ್ಚಿನದು ಏನನ್ನು ಕೂಡ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟಿಂಗ್ ಪಾರ್ಟೀಸ್ ಸಾಧಿಸ್ಕೊಳ್ಬಹುದು. ಬಟ್ ಆ ಬೇಸಿಕ್ ರೂಲ್ಸ್ ಗಳೇನಿದೆ ಅದನ್ನ ವಯಲೇಟ್ ಮಾಡೋ ಹಾಗಿಲ್ಲ. ಅದನ್ನ ನಾವು ಸಬ್ಸ್ಟಾಂಟೇಟಿವ್ ಲಾ ಅಂತ ಕರೀತೇವೆ. And the second one, not an exhaustive law. That means it does not deal with the rules relating to all the branches of law of contract, which will not specify the each and every minute concepts. For example, ನಿಮಗೆ ಒಂದು ಪ್ರೋಗ್ರಾಮ್ ಆರ್ಗನೈಸ್ ಮಾಡಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಇದೆ ಅಂತ ಆದ್ರೆ ಕಾಲೇಜಲ್ಲಿ, ಅಂತಹ ಪ್ರೋಗ್ರಾಮ್ಸ್ಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಟೀಚರ್ಸ್ ನಿಮಗೆ ಜಸ್ಟ್ ಏನೆಲ್ಲ ಆರ್ಗನೈಸ್ ಆಗಬೇಕು, ಬೇಸಿಕ್ ನೆಸೆಸಿಟೀಸ್ಗಳು ಏನು ಆ ಪ್ರೋಗ್ರಾಮ್ ಎಂದು ಅದನ್ನ ಮಾತ್ರ ನಿಮ್ಗೆ ಡಿಫೈನ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಸೊ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಟಾಸ್ಕ್ ಏನು, ಆ ಬೇಸಿಕ್ ಥೀಮ್ ಅನ್ನ ವಯಲೇಟ್ ಮಾಡಿದ ಹಾಗೆ ಆ ಬೇಸಿಕ್ ಥೀಮ್ಸ್ ಅನ್ನ ಫುಲ್ಫಿಲ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಉಳಿದಿರುವಂತೆ ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ರಾ ಅಡಿಷನಲ್ ಥಿಂಗ್ಸ್ ಗಳನ್ನ ನೀವು ಏನೂ ಕೂಡ ಆರ್ಗನೈಸ್ ಮಾಡಬಹುದು. ಸೊ ಅದನ್ನ ನಾವು ಸಬ್ಸ್ಟಾಂಟಿವ್ ಲಾ ಅಂತ ಕರೀತೇವೆ. ಈಗ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಟೀಚರ್ಸ್ ನಿಮ್ಗೆ ಈಚ್ ಅಂಡ್ ಎವ್ರಿ ಮೈನ್ಯೂಟ್ ಕಾನ್ಸೆಪ್ಟ್ಸ್ ಗಳನ್ನ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪ್ಲೈನ್ ಮಾಡೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಸೊ ದಟ್ ವಿಲ್ ಬಿಲಾಂಗ್ಸ್ ಟು ಯು, ಅದು ನಿಮ್ಮ ಫ್ರೀಡಮ್. ಸೊ ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ಅದನ್ನು ನಾವು ನಾಟ್ ಅನ್ ಎಕ್ಸಾಸ್ಟಿವ್ ಲಾ ಅಂತ ಕರೀತೇವೆ. ಸಪೋಸ್ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಟೀಚರ್ಸ್ ನಿಮ್ಗೆ ಈಚ್ ಅಂಡ್ ಎವ್ರಿ ಮೈನ್ಯೂಟ್ ಪಾರ್ಟ್ಸ್ ಗಳನ್ನ ಹೇಗೆ ಆರ್ಗನೈಸ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಅನ್ನೋದನ್ನ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ, ಸೊ ಆಗ ನಾವು ಅದನ್ನ ಎಕ್ಸಾಸ್ಟಿವ್ ಲಾ ಅಂತ ಕರೀತೇವೆ. ಬಟ್ ಇಂಡಿಯನ್ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ ಆಕ್ಟ್ is not an exhaustive law which will defines only the limiting factors. ಏನ್ ಮಾಡಬಾರ್ದು ಅಂತ ಮಾತ್ರ ಹೇಳ್ತದೆ, ಆದ್ರೆ ಏನ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಯಾವುದೆಲ್ಲ ಈಚ್ ಅಂಡ್ ಎವ್ರಿ ಮೈನ್ಯೂಟ್ ಸ್ಟೆಪ್ಸ್ ಗಳನ್ನ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪ್ಲೈನ್ ಮಾಡೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಸೊ ಇಟ್ ಈಸ್ ಸಬ್ಸ್ಟಾಂಟಿವ್ ಲಾ ಅಂಡ್ ಇಟ್ ಈಸ್ ನಾಟ್ ಆನ್ exhaustive law. And again, general principles and special contracts. So here Indian Contract Act has two parts. The first one, general principles, and the second one, special contract. Section 1 to 75 of Indian Contract Act specifies the general principles of the contract which is applicable to all the contracts. ಎಲ್ಲ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ಸ್ ಗಳಿಗೆ ಅಪ್ಲೈ ಆಗೋ ಹಾಗೆ ಯಾವುದೆಲ್ಲ ರೂಲ್ಸ್ ಗಳಿದೆ ಅದನ್ನು ಫಸ್ಟ್ ಪಾರ್ಟ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪ್ಲೇನ್ ಮಾಡ್ತದೆ. ಸೊ ಅದನ್ನು ನಾವು ಜನರಲ್ ಪ್ರಿನ್ಸಿಪಲ್ಸ್ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿ ಕರೀತೇವೆ. ಅಂಡ್ ದ ಸೆಕೆಂಡ್ ಪಾರ್ಟ್ ರೆಪ್ರೆಸೆಂಟ್ಸ್ ಸ್ಪೆಷಲ್ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ಸ್. ಕೆಲವೊಂದು ಸ್ಪೆಷಲ್ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ಸ್ ಗಳಿಗೆ ಸಂಬಂಧಪಟ್ಟಂತ ರೂಲ್ಸ್ ಅನ್ನ ಡಿಫೈನ್ ಮಾಡ್ತದೆ. ಸೊ ಈ ಸ್ಪೆಷಲ್ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ಸ್ ಗಳಂದ್ರೆ ಯಾವುದೆಲ್ಲ ಬರ್ತದೆ, ಮೇ ಬಿ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ ಆಫ್ ಇಂಡಮ್ನಿಟಿ ಆರ್ ಗ್ಯಾರಂಟಿ, ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ ಆಫ್ ಬೇಲ್ಮೆಂಟ್, ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ ಆಫ್ ಪ್ಲೆಡ್ಜ್ ಆರ್ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ ಆಫ್ ಏಜೆನ್ಸಿ. ಸೊ ಇದನ್ನು ನಾವು ಸ್ಪೆಷಲ್ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ಸ್ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿ ಕರೀತೇವೆ. That you should remember, Indian Contract Act has two parts: the general principles applicable to all the contracts And the second part, special contracts like indemnity, guarantee, pledge, bailment, or agency. So we are going to study these concepts for our entire semester. General principles and special contracts under business law subject. Okay. So that's all the classes today. So I'll summarize the class. So in today's class we have learned the meaning of contract, meaning of agreement, the differences between agreement and contract, and the specified statements of contract and Indian Contract Act. So let us have some multiple choice questions. Indian Contract Act came into force on. So here we have different dates. Yes, you can easily guess. The answer is option A, that is 1st September 1872. And the second question, pick yes or no for the statements. Indian Contract Act is an exhaustive law. Of course, the answer is B. Of course, Indian Contract Act is not an exhaustive law and it's a substantive law. Choose yes or no to the statement. Indian Contract Act is substantive law. Of course, the answer is A. Yes, it's the substantive law, which will define only the basic principles. The objective of this law is to lay down the legal rules on perception, promise, imagination, promotion. It's promise. Choose a correct one. Agreement plus enforceability equals to contract. Contract plus enforceability is equal to agreement. Promise plus enforceability plus contract. Agreement minus enforceability equals to contract. Little confusing, but I'm sure you'll guess the answer, that is agreement plus enforceability equals to contract. So this is all about this session. In the next class, we are going to learn the elements of contract in detail, or the basic requirements of contract or general principles of contract in detail. Hope you enjoyed the class and happy learning.